Hey there, Dangar here. Today's video is about towing a boat with another boat and is proudly sponsored by MarineEngine.com. So there's plenty of reasons why you might need to tow another boat with your boat. Sometimes you just come across people that are broken down, sometimes you're just transporting a boat that's not running, whatever. Now it does make a bit of a difference if it's an emergency or not. Say for example, it's just a boat you're trying to deliver somewhere, you wait for a really nice calm day, makes it a lot easier. But if someone's broken down, you're kind of stuck with the conditions you've got. Towing's never completely without risk though, so always have a think about whether you actually need to do the tow. Sometimes you might be able to just get people onto your boat and make sure they're safe and, let insurance take care of the boat, in a worst case scenario. But if you decide you need to, then this is how I go about it. Sorry, it's actually getting quite windy today. I hope that doesn't make too much noise in this microphone. Not much I can do about it, unfortunately. I'm going to be using my boat, the Green Machine, to do the towing, particularly after I put this new little tow bar on. But we'll also talk about techniques if you're just towing off the cleats at the back of the boat. This is the boat we're going to be towing. It's a 5 metre aluminium runabout, so a little bit bigger than the Green Machine, but we'll be able to tow it no trouble. I'm going to tow this boat from the tow eye where you would attach the winch for the trailer, which is a good strong central low down. It's a great point to tow small boats like this from. We'll talk a bit about how to secure your line to larger boats in a second, but for now I'm going to clip our line onto here. I'm using a 12mm nylon rope, which will be more than enough for towing a boat of this weight. I guess the first thing to say about towing is just keep each boat under control as much as you can during the whole process. In this case, I'm starting with both boats tied to either side of a pontoon, so both boats completely under control at this point. My plan is to go and clip the tow rope straight to the bow here before we undo it, obviously, and then I'll go and show you how I'm going to attach it to the Green Machine. So this is the tow line I've made up. It's 12mm nylon rope. I've spliced an eye in one end, and in that eye I've put a hook, a little snap hook like this. This way I can clip it onto a boat, like this aluminium boat, but I can also put this eye over a cleat if I need to. So you can see it's a really strong attachment point for this boat. These are you winch the boat up on the trailer from here, so it's more than strong enough. Next thing I'm going to do is trim the motor down on the boat we're towing. And then I'm also going to centre the wheel so the motor's pointing straight ahead. By having the motor down like that, you'll stop the boat sort of slewing around as you tow it, because they don't really have much of a keel, these shallow draft runabouts like this. Now I've got the rope attached to the stem of the boat we're towing. I'm going to come around here, just take a couple of turns around this bar, then I can untie the boats and we'll drive straight forward and then tow this boat out into free water away from the wharf. Then we can start adjusting the length and stuff like that. So here we are underway. Now, this hasn't got much strain on the line at all. I've still only got sort of one turn around this, and I can really hang on to it with my thumb. So it goes to show how little force there really is on that rope once you're towing a boat of this size at a slow speed. There's a few things worth mentioning. Obviously, when you take off very, very slowly until the slack's out of the rope. That way there isn't a huge jolt or shock load. Also, be careful in that initial stage when you're taking off, because if you don't have someone to tend the line, then you've got a really high chance of picking it up in your prop. You're much more likely to pick a line up if you're going in reverse than heading forward, but it can happen. Then you've got a situation where you've got the towing boat disabled because it's got a rope around the prop. You've got another boat that's not running that you're trying to tow. It's all tied together and it can all start to go very wrong very quickly. If you do happen to pick the line up in your prop, one thing you can try is if you pick the rope up in reverse, you can simply try starting the boat again and then just briefly knocking it into forward gear. Quite often, surprisingly often, you'll actually just spin the rope back off the prop. Otherwise, you'll need to trim it up and start manually winding it off, but it's just something you can try if you're stuck. As you can probably see at the moment, I'm towing this boat reasonably close to the stern, so probably on about a 10-metre tow rope. Ideally, if you're doing a long tow with a bigger boat in worse conditions, you want a much longer tow rope because that'll give you a fair bit of elasticity. It'll take a lot of the shock load out. It gives us a cushioning effect. It also means that if you need to stop, there's less chance of the boat that being towed just running in the back of you. There are all sorts of reasons why it's good to have a slightly longer tow rope. So what I'm going to start doing is, because this isn't locked off anywhere, I can just simply let it go and then just let it start feeding out. So it's a nice way to be able to adjust your tow rope by just having a couple of turns around a tow point. Then if I wanted to, I could say, right, that's about right, go and put a couple more turns, lock it off, and then you're good to settle in for the rest of the tow. In order to be able to let it go easily, what I would probably do in this situation if I did want to lock it off was just take it down here to one of my cleats. No need to do a locking turn or anything. This way, even if it's under load, I can let the line go. Being able to let the line go again is really important with towing. If something goes wrong, you know, you don't want to be in a situation where the two boats are tethered to each other with these knots that have locked up and, you know, you just can't get rid of the tow if you need to. Say you're towing a boat that starts sinking, something like that. You know, you need to think about all the things that could go wrong and what you're going to do if they do. Because things never quite go to plan, even if you do have it just with the rope with a couple of turns and then cleat it off, so you should, in theory, be able to let it go, always make sure you've got a knife on board, preferably one with serrations. They're really good for cutting rope if you need to just let the boat go in a hurry. What I'm going to do now, instead of locking this off though, is just putt over to somewhere a little bit out of the wind, and then I'll go through rigging up a bridle, because it's much more common on a regular fishing boat that you're going to have a couple of cleats and a transom rather than a bar like this. Now's probably as good a time as any to mention also, if you are towing a heavier boat in slightly worse sea conditions, having that long rope, as we said, will give you a sort of shock absorption effect. Now, one other technique that's used a lot is to suspend a weight from the centre of the tow rope. So, you know, halfway between this boat and the other boat, you can have a weight suspended from the tow line, and that actually acts as a bit of shock absorber as well. In this case, obviously, there's no need, but it's just a technique to be aware of. On a similar note, if you're towing a boat in bigger sea conditions, then as well as having your tow line longer, make sure that tow rope is a multiple of the distance between the waves, the wavelength. So if, for example, the crests of the waves are 20 metres apart, make your tow rope 20, 40 metres, whatever you need. But that way, the boat you're towing with and the boat that's being towed are always both in the peak of a wave or both in the trough. You never have a situation where the towboat's on the peak of a wave while the boat you're towing's in a trough. And that can really help make the whole tow much smoother as well. Okay, let's talk about different options for rigging up bridles from the back cleats now. Now, although you can tow a relatively small boat a short distance from one of the cleats, one of the gunnels, it's not great for a couple of reasons. One is you're towing from one side of the boat, so it's going to be harder to steer, everything's going to be a little bit skew-if, and you're also putting all the load on a single cleat. With a small boat like this, not a huge issue, but a bridle's great because it solves both those problems. All a bridle really is a length of rope with a loop at each end that allows you to sort of form a Y shape. So you have your tow line coming in, then your bridle then takes it to both sides of the boat, to both cleats. So it means the tow line's coming from the centre of the boat, where you normally couldn't attach it because the outboard's in the way, and it also means the weight's distributed to both sides. One option I really like is that most boats will have some sort of deck line attached to one of the cleats. If not, then at least one they can put on when they need to. Then I'll take that line, run it around the tow rope, and then I'll just cleat it off back here. So I'll do that now. You can see these lines are quite new, so they're floating, so they're not likely to get picked up in the prop. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull the tow line in, given this boat's drifted towards us now. Oh, right against us, in fact. And then we'll just head off forward again. So you can see here, one loop's just that deck line from the starboard cleat. Then I'm just going to cleat my tow rope off to this port side cleat, and then we'll go forward. The disadvantage to that over a system like this with the bar is this bar's mounted forward to the outboard, and that allows the boat to pivot, and that's actually quite critical when it comes to manoeuvring when you're towing. So it's probably worth going through that on the chalkboard just to explain the theory a little bit. Okay, so the chalkboard didn't quite go to plan. It's a long story, but I'm now actually on a long motorcycle ride and I've got to redo this bit, so bear with me. The first bridle we made looked like this. We've got our looped line here, which is just a standard deck line, then we've got our tow rope through it and out. One of the characteristics of this style of bridle is that that loop can actually slide up and down the main tow line, which will alter where it gets pulled from, and that will change as you start turning and pulling from one side, and it won't always return to dead straight, so it's in some ways not ideal. One advantage it does have though is as you turn, it does seem to keep the load across both cleats a little bit more than a fixed bridle does. What we'll do now is I'll show you how to make up a fixed bridle where it's always towed from the centre of the boat. Now I've got this bridle just onto the two cleats on the side of the boat, and this is the centre. If I pull it taut, I can find the centre quite easily. So the traditional way of putting a sort of an eye in the centre of the rope like this is to just take each side and twist it. So what we're going to do is take the two sides, do a twist again, and then what you end up with is a sort of a bowline type turn. Now I've got my two loops like this, I'm just going to pass this shackle through. There are a few other ways you can put an eye in the middle of a rope, but we'll go through that in a different video. So you can see here the bridle's distributing the load relatively evenly to the two cleats. The shackle isn't strictly necessary. We could have done the two twists to put the eye in and tied our other bowline straight through that, but I think it makes things a bit nicer. Of course, because no one's steering this boat now, we're turning away, which is putting one load here, so I guess I should go back to steering. So when you have a fixed bridle like this can't slide along, it always comes from the centre. And that works pretty well when you're towing in a straight line. But what happens when you try to turn, particularly to make a tight manoeuvre, say for example you're trying to right a boat or something, and you've really got to pull it in a very specific direction in a very enclosed space. So what happens is, as the boat turns, this line, say, is coming down this way. If I'm turning towards starboard, I think it is here, yeah, looking backwards, sorry. But this line will get taut, which is on the port side of the boat. And what happens is it counteracts your turning. You're trying to turn, but at the same time the weight's pulling on the port side of the boat, and the boat tends to sort of slew sideways rather than turning. If you imagine it being like a twin screw boat, it's like turning your helm to starboard, but then going astern on your port motor. You're sort of working against yourself, and that's what happens with this bridle setup. The solution to this problem of a bridle making it hard to manoeuvre a boat is to have the tow rope attached further forward of the outboard, and this is the reason I added that tow rail to the green machine. Dedicated boats for towing boats will always have a post forward in somewhere in the back deck forward of the rudder. So if you imagine a setup like this, where the tow post, the tow line's coming from here, even if there's a force on here, the boat can kind of pivot more easily around this post, and it'll be much more manoeuvrable than if it was all the weight was hanging off the transom here. One of the catalysts for making this video was helping a friend right his catamaran boat. Like, it's about a 5-metre aluminium catamaran outboard that had flipped over. It actually had a port come sunk, and it was a really windy day. In order to right the boat, it needed to be pulled in a very specific direction, either directly down the centre line of the boat, and it was really windy, and you didn't have long before everything got blown out of alignment, so you had to get in position very quickly. And the only way for him to have that manoeuvrability was to tie the tow line actually to the bow of the boat. So in his case, it was a small flat punt style boat, so there was nothing on the deck, it was a flush deck. He tied his tow line to the bow, which meant that even though this boat was much lighter, it was a small boat, 15 horsepower, so a small configuration, quite a bit of weight coming off here, but because it was at the front here, it's very easy to manoeuvre the boat still. The other real advantage to this setup is that if this cleat breaks here, there's no chance of your outboard cowling getting scratched or anything, because your face will block it. What we'll do now is we'll head back to the pontoon with this boat in tow, and we'll talk about sort of arriving at your destination. If you've got other people with you, it gets a lot easier. I would ideally always have someone on the boat that's being towed, if you can. I'm here by myself today, so I can't do that. But it gives you a few great advantages. One is they can steer the other boat if needed. Another great thing about having someone on the boat being towed is when you get to your destination, you can bring that boat really close to a pontoon and they can sort of grab it, let the line go, all that kind of stuff. When I am on my own like this though, what I like to do is get to where I'm going. I make sure that I'm heading into the current or into the wind, depending which is stronger, so that the boat I'm towing doesn't then overtake me when I pull up. I want to be able to pull up and then know that boat's going to hang back on its tow line. Then what it allows me to do is secure the boat that I'm towing with. This sort of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the video, where you want to have all the boats sort of under control at all times. By pulling up to the pontoon and letting the current keep the boat I'm towing away from the pontoon, I'm not worried about that. Then I can tie this boat up securely, the boat I'm towing with. Once it's securely tied up, then I can go and grab the tow rope and start pulling the other boat in towards the pontoon. So that's generally the way I do it if I'm on my own. As we get towards the wharf, I'm actually going to go out into deeper water and then angle in towards the wharf. If you cut in really fine, the boat you're towing can sort of skew port or starboard, and if you're too close to shore and it happens to go that way, then it can run aground. This way I'm guaranteed that the boat will stay in deeper water until I'm ready to haul it in. So tow boat's out here. We'll just tie the green machine up. Alright, then the boat we're towing is floating around in reasonably safe deep water. Well, here we are back safe. There's lots of different ways you can tow a boat. I find these sort of techniques work for me generally for the types of towing I do. If you can get some help, I would highly recommend it. It's much harder doing it on your own. Ideally, having a couple of people on the towboat and one maybe on the boat being towed is great. Maybe even a couple on both boats. More hands definitely makes it easier and safer. This is the loop in our bridle, and because it's got this bend in it, we can break the back of it the same way you would with a bowline, and that'll come undone nice and easily. So even with one hand you can get that undone. Alright, well thanks for watching. I hope this video gives you some tips about towing another boat if ever you need to. I didn't plan to film these bits in the outback on this motorcycle ride, but you know, you make do. One advantage though. I was at a truck stop in the absolute middle of nowhere and I found this hat. That's gold. You may as well just say wanker, but then it kind of works on two levels, I guess. Alright, well thanks again, take care, and I'll catch you next week. See ya.